I'm pretty sure a lot of us are familiar with Crayola. From using their crayons to their color pencils, markers, and every other thing in between, you'll find that a lot of artists started out with these. Recently, I've been getting this itch to try and use them again and see how far I can take them. So hi everyone, I'm Ward, welcome to my channel Wardrawsalot, and this week we're going to take these Crayola markers and turn them into Crayola watercolors. Now, I know what you're thinking right now, Ward, there's already watercolors from Crayola. That's cool. I don't want to use those. I want to use all the different pigments and colors that come in these marker packs because the watercolors that I always find from Crayola are those small packs, and this Colors of the World and Bold and Bright markers pack has way more variety and way more of a chance for me to kind of explore what I can do with these colors. Plus, I didn't want to buy the watercolors. I already had these. So now, to avoid an existential crisis as to why I didn't test out these markers onto a drawing before I went in, that's exactly what I did. Since I am going to be taking the markers and diluting them with water, it's really important that I go ahead and see how that plays out on this paper. It is watercolor paper, so it's going to hold up, but I'm not good with watercolors. I'm just going to be straight up with you guys. I am booty doody buns with them, okay? So I have to have a lot of practice, and using something like these Crayola markers and diluting them down with water with these watercolor brushes is really going to help me kind of get used to the feel of how it is. So as you can see on the top, you have like the regular swatch of the markers. On the bottom is like this diluted out version with the water. It's just like how flat can I get it, which looked really nice. I did try layering it at one point on the brown, but it wasn't layering really nicely and it kind of looked a little grimy, and that kind of happened with every color that I tried to layer out, so I was like, ew. What I did do is take the tip of the watercolor brush and touch the tip of the Crayola. Fuck, I'm such a kid, bro. I hate this shit. Let's try that again. I took the tip of the watercolor brush and then brushed it up against the tip of the Crayola, and then made a nice gradient fade out with that brush, and it made me see that there's a lot more control that can be done if I do it that way than instead of just laying the color down on the paper and then spreading it out with the water. So I thought that that was a good find that I did, which is always why you should be testing your colors no matter what. So after like about 10 minutes of playing around with the colors and seeing how they worked, I thought I was confident enough to go into the drawing with these colors and feel like I wasn't going to ruin it. So I've had this drawing in this watercolor pad for like, I'm gonna say over a month now. It's been a while since I've been wanting to get to this video, I just haven't been able to until now. Also, for reference, in case any of you are wondering, I'm using the Canson XL watercolor paper. It's the stuff that you could get for like $5 or $6 at Walmart. It is kind of cheap watercolor paper, but it's reliable enough to take a beating from someone like me who is a beginner. Probably people who have a lot more control with watercolors can do so much better with it. Me on the other hand, I'm not spending like a lot of money on expensive watercolor paper if I don't even know how to use watercolors properly. You get me? I'm very much for using the cheap stuff first, and then when I'm good at it, get the expensive stuff. So for this drawing, I did use both techniques, the one where I laid down the color first and then spread it out with the watercolor brush, and I also did the technique where I'm just going to call it tip to tip to make it easier to reference, but I used both of them because each one kind of served their purpose. The one where I laid the color down and then spread it out with the watercolor, I felt like was good for larger areas compared to taking it from the tip and then putting it down into smaller areas. I had a little bit more control. So each method was good for their own cause. Now let's talk about the markers themselves. So we do have a lot of colors to work with, which is good. The one thing that I noticed though is these colors get significantly lighter once you dilute them with the water. So you have to keep that in mind when you're working with them, is that they're not going to be the color that you swatched down from these markers originally. And you could tell that from when I did the swatches in the beginning. Those really heavily concentrated colors, became really diluted with the water because they are water-based markers. You can also tell that in this drawing right here, whenever I put down a color and it's significantly darker, then I use that water, it really lightens up the color. So you have to plan accordingly to how you want it to look on your drawing, because if you're planning on using a really dark color in a certain area, it will end up lighter. Now, using these Crayola markers, you're definitely going to need a good amount of transition tones. Personally, I feel like this is with every marker though. If it's like Copics or Ohuhus or Crayola markers, they're going to need a good amount of transitions, so this way the drawing looks nice and blended. There we go, that's the word, because I completely forgot the word. So because of that, I obviously suggest the bigger packs, like that Colors of the World pack came with 24 different colors, so you have a variety of things to choose from. And because the Colors of the World pack only has skin tones, I bought the Bold and Brights pack with it, so this way I have some colors to kind of give to the characters. You could use only those skin tones entirely if you wanted to, for like the hair, the eyes, the everything, but I personally like to use a lot of color in my art, so that's why I got the Bold and Brights pack to accompany it. Now, because I do have a lot of those transition tones and a lot of colors to work with, these did blend out beautifully. And even when I didn't have a lot of those tones with me, the color in general just blended out really nicely on the paper, which is good because you don't want colors that are a struggle to kind of mix or blend together, especially if they're watercolors, because it's going to end up looking weird. But thankfully, these Crayola markers had a good amount of pigment and were really easy to blend, so that's good on them. Personally, using these, I had a really nice experience. They felt good, they worked great, the colors were nice and vibrant. I liked it. My issue came from my own skill, right? Because like I said earlier, I'm not good with watercolors. So I would peel up the page because I ended up using too much water and over blending like I always do. And it just looked kind of weird at first, right? So I really had to go back in a lot of the time and save the drawing, even though I was the one who ruined it. But I told myself it was okay if I ended up ruining the drawing, just for the sole fact that I'm learning on how to use these, and on top of that, I'm just not a watercolor person in general, so I learned from experience. So if I ended up like completely destroying this drawing, I would at least learn how to not do that again in the future. But I didn't ruin it, which I'm really happy to say, because I was really nervous going into this, and now I'm not so nervous, which means that these Crayolas are really user-friendly when it comes to somebody learning using watercolors in general. So that's why I really like them, because they're inexpensive. You can find them, I think, almost anywhere, like from Walmart to, I think, like grocery stores that are like the big chains will have sometimes like a school section, or just like any general store will have Crayolas. Of course, you gotta look around and see which one has the cheapest price, but they're very user-friendly in every way possible, and I honestly can only vouch for them in a good way. They're just really good to use in general. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, okay? You can see my watercolor skill here is kind of lackluster. I constantly color out of the lines, and I don't know how much water to use, and I'm going back and forth a lot, which is okay, that's fine. But as I was doing that, I knew ahead of time that I was going to be using color pencils on top of this. Now, the color pencils that I ended up using were Prismacolor colored pencils, and that's just because that's my preferred brand of colored pencils. However, you can use Crayola color pencils on top of any watercolor drawings that you want, and that's fine too. Those Crayola color pencils have pretty good pigment, and they're pretty cheap as well, and again, very accessible, and you can find them nearly anywhere. So keep that in mind, that just because I use Prismacolors on top doesn't mean that you have to use them as well. You can use practically any color pencil brand on top of any watercolor. I personally like the look of the texture from colored pencils, which is why I like to use them on top of watercolors, especially on this kind of paper, which is a little toothier. So because of the ridges on the paper, the color pencil goes down really nicely on this paper, which is why I like it so much. Now, although I used colored pencil, I'm pretty sure you can use liners as well if you want to. It's just whatever you prefer. I try and use my color pencils as much as I possibly can when I get the chance, because I don't get to use them very often. Plus, it's a nice change of pace for myself as well, especially because I always do like markers and liners, so I thought it would be nice to change it up by doing watercolors and colored pencils. I also tried to use the colored pencils like strategically. I didn't want to use a black outline everywhere because I wanted a somewhat soft look. I did end up using the black liner for the eyes just because I really wanted them to stand out, because I think they're pretty, so that's why I wanted them to stand out. But for the face, I just used a darker color within that variation, so you could tell the skin tone is kind of very pinky, very purpley, all that stuff, right? So I made sure to use a dark enough liner on the outside to keep that look along with it and not just kind of throw it off. Same thing with the hair. It's kind of like a greenish color, right? But it's weird because it was a black marker that I used for the hair, but instead it was just like a really concentrated green. So when I ended up like taking the watercolor brush and spreading out the color, it just kind of went into that color, but it's really pretty, so I don't mind it at all. And I did some areas lighter and some areas darker with that color as well to give it some dynamic, which I enjoyed. And then I also went on top of that with two different colored color pencils, one that's a darker color than the hair and one that's lighter, so it can again give it some dynamic. Now, whenever I do something like a review or like trying a new technique or product or whatever, I always ask myself, would I use this thing again? And for these Crayolas, turning them into watercolors, yes, I totally would. Of course, I still do need a lot more practice with them, but I wasn't like intimidated to use the supply. You know, like sometimes when you have an expensive supply, you'll be like, oh my god, I don't want to use this because I don't want to waste it on a bad drawing or something like that. That's how I always think, right? Especially because like when you do own expensive art supplies, you're like, I don't want to use them for nothing. But this, because it was so, cheap in a good way, you're able to feel like you can experiment more with it and can push yourself and see what you can do with those kinds of products. So that's why I was really happy to use something like this. It's overall really friendly and inviting to use, and because I think it is a kid's product and a lot of us did grow up with it, we feel much more comfortable and familiar with using something like it, and overall are more likely, I feel like, to have a good time using a product like this. Now, to be fair, you could probably do this technique with any water-based marker, like legitimately any single one, but I chose Crayola because I'm comfortable with the brand and I kind of trust them because their pigments are good and their products are always good, and on top of that, I had it in the house, so I was like, why not try the technique with the stuff that I already have instead of buying different ones. So if you already have water-based markers in your house and you want to try them with that, try them. Maybe they'll be better pigment than the Crayolas, or maybe they'll blend better, or shit, maybe it'll be worse. I'm just going to be real. Maybe it's just going to be a complete disaster. And you're going to be like, damn, why did I even bother using these? So that's why it's always good to try. But remember to test them out before you go headfirst into a drawing, because you don't want to end up a very sad person after everything. Also, side note, this is just really good for using color pencils in general too, because it covers a large surface area, so you don't have to end up having wrist pain for coloring so much with colored pencils. So here is the finished drawing, and I absolutely love how it came out. I think that I would definitely use these markers again in this way, just because it was really user-friendly, and I just love them. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and remember, I love you. Bye!